Welcome to PokerStrategy.com, your professional poker school. Now let's get to the most important part of the short stack strategy, playing before the flop. You found a table and you're playing. You get your two cards and the question is, to play or not to play? We should tell you that the short stack strategy is based on 2 points. First, if you decide to play, raise. Never just call a bet. And secondly, you only play a few very strong hands. However, you must initially understand one concept in order to play perfectly: position. And this is where we will start out with this video. What is your position on the table? Your turn in the betting round depends on who's the dealer. The more players between you and him in the betting round, the earlier it is your turn. In order to give it a name, this concept is called a position. Your position tells you when it's your turn to act in a betting round. On a table with 10 players, there are also 10 positions. They are separated into 4 groups: early, middle and late positions and the blinds. The 2 late positions, BU and CO. The dealer and the player to his right are in the late position. The dealer is also called the button, BU for short, while the player directly before him is the cutoff, or CO. The 3 middle positions, MP1, MP2 and MP3. The 3 players that sit counterclockwise from the late positions are the middle positions. They are called MP1, MP2 and MP3. The 3 early positions, UTG1, UTG2 and UTG3. The 3 players that sit counterclockwise from the middle positions are in the early position. They are called UTG1, UTG2 and UTG3. The abbreviation UTG stands for under the gun. The 2 blind positions, SB and BB. The 2 players that paid the small and big blinds are called the blinds. The player directly next to the dealer is the small blind. He paid the smaller forced bet. The second player is called the big blind. He paid the larger of the 2 forced bets. What happens with less than 10 players? This overview assumes that there are 10 players on the table. However, that is not always the case. If there are only 9 players on the table, then there is 1 less early position. If there are 8 players, there are only 1 of the original 3 early positions. With 7 players, there is no longer an early position. The fewer the players on the table, the more positions there are that got away. First the early, then the middle, and so on. And don't forget, if there are less than 7 opponents at the table, or more than 2 other players playing the short stack strategy except for you, leave the table and find a new game. Which cards should you play? You can get the complete strategy for playing before the flop by looking at the starting hands chart. There you will see which cards you should play in which situations and how. Don't be afraid if it appears confusing. The explanations will follow shortly, and once you understand them, we promise it will be unbelievably helpful and simple to use during the game. In the strategy article belonging to this video, you will find a download link for the starting hands chart. It makes sense to print it out and always have it within reach when you are playing. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the promised explanations about the starting hands chart. What do the card abbreviations mean? Every individual card is represented through a letter or a number. The letters correspond with the English descriptions, for example, Q for Queen. AA stands for a pair of aces, or pocket aces, while 7-7 to ace-ace means that in this case you will play all pairs from pocket 7s to pocket aces. A-king in contrast is the abbreviation for an ace and a king. The colour doesn't matter, i.e. it doesn't matter if you have 2 hearts or one card is a spade and the other is a club. Here's some further examples. What if nobody raised? If nobody raised before you, then your position is important. The upper part of the starting hands chart tells you which cards you should play in which position. If your hand for your position is listed here, then you should raise. If your hand isn't listed, you should fold. It is easy to calculate how large your raise should be. Your raise equals 4 times the big blind plus 1 big blind for every player that called already. Let's assume that you've just received your start capital and you are starting at NL10 tables. Here the big blind is 10 cents. If you want to raise now, you raise at least 4 times 10 cents, thus 40 cents. If somebody already called before you, you just add 10 cents to your bet. That would make your bet 50 cents. If 2 players called ahead of you, it would be 60 cents, and so on. But what if somebody bets? The situation changes if somebody already raised before you, or if you already made a raise and then somebody re-raises you. In this case, you look at the second part of the starting hands chart. If your hand is listed here for your relative situation, you should go all in directly and bet everything. If your hand isn't listed, you fold. If somebody raised before you, or if somebody raises after you, and your hand is playable, you go directly all in. The hands that you go all in with depend on the situation. There was exactly one who raised before you, there were two or more raises before you, or somebody raises after you. It doesn't matter how often. Re-steals. The topic of re-steals listed in the lower part of the starting hands chart is a little more complex. First you must know two terms, blind steal and re-steal. Blind steal. A player raised in the late position or in the small blind position after all other players before him folded. Then he directly attacks the player or players in the blind positions. This is also called a blind steal because you can make a raise like this with weaker cards too, just to steal the blinds. Re-steal. If the player is confronted with a blind steal from an opponent and goes all in, this is called a re-steal. He steals the pot back. The lower part of the starting hand charts tells you two things now. What cards you should re-steal with or go all in with if you are confronted with a blind steal raise. What cards you should go all in with if you made a blind steal and your opponent went all in, or re-steals. Too complicated? Then take a look at the following examples and don't forget to download the starting hands chart with the complete strategy overview as a printed version. Then you always have it within reach when playing. In order to make it less confusing, we use the NL10 limit for all the examples. The first hand you get is an ace-queen suited. You are in early position, UTG3 to be precise, and both players before you folded. What do you do now? The answer is clear. Ace-queen as a starting hand looks good, but the starting hand chart tells you that you should fold this hand in the early position. In the long run, ace-queen in the early position only brings you loss even though the cards may look good. In the next example, you are in MP3 and you get two nines, also known as pocket nines. Two players from the five ahead of you called the big blind. According to the starting hands chart, you should raise with pocket nines in the middle position if nobody raised yet. Now you just have the question as to how much you should raise. Here's the rule. 4 big blinds plus 1 big blind for each player that already called. In this case, 2 players already called, which then makes a raise of 6 big blinds. The big blind is 10 cents, thus you raise 6 times 10 cents, equaling 60 cents. Now you have an ace-king and you are on the button, thus right before the blinds. One player in the middle position already raised, and now you have the question about how you should react to this. Since somebody raised before you, the second part of the starting hands chart is important for you. In the section marked, if an opponent bets you go all in with, there you will find that if exactly one opponent before you raised, you should go all in with all pairs of jacks or better and with ace-king. That means you should go all in here, i.e. bet all of your money. Our last example hand gives you pocket eights in the big blind. Except for one player in late position, all others are folded. The player raises to 4 big blinds, so 40 cents. If a player raises in the late position after everyone before him already folded, this is a so-called blind steal. Now you have two options, either fold or re-steal, which means you go all in. In order to know how you should act in this situation, you only have to look at the third part of the starting hands chart, re-steals. There you will find the entry that you should re-steal with all pairs of 8s or better and with ace-jack, ace-queen and ace-king. In this example you have 2 8s or pocket 8s. This means that you can re-steal and you go all in. In this video you learned that you should never call before the flop. If you play, then raise. What your position is and how to figure it out. Which cards to play in which situation. That you raise to 4 big blinds plus 1 big blind per player who called if nobody raised yet. That you should bet all of your money or go all in as soon as somebody raises before you or after you, provided your hand is playable. What a blind steal and re-steal are and when you should use these moves. The last article and video to do with the short stack strategy deals with your play in the betting rounds after the flop. The team at Poker Strategy wish you lots of luck at the tables.